Pele is a person with a disability who currently serves as a CEO and founder of TAF Africa. I love to talk to each time I get the chance. Welcome, Mr. Pele.
Gentlemen, another round of applause.
He's a program director and co-founder, Grassroots Initiative for Gender and Development. He's an inclusive development practitioner who's worked at the intersections of gender rights and disability justice in humanitarian response and recovery contexts. You're welcome, Mr. Balogun.
And certainly last but not the least, let us welcome Jude Ilo with a round of applause.
Mr. Jude Ilo is the acting ED, Center for Civilians in Conflict. He has close to 2 decades, that's 20 years of experience working in the democracy space, driving social innovation and influencing change. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for him once again, and indeed for all of the panelists who are joining us this morning. We're getting started early with this all-important conversation on media and democracy, but we're focusing on issues of representation, inclusion, and community.
Right, and we would also be joined by Grace Jerry in the midst of the conversation. So, gentlemen and lady, Prof, do you see something peculiar about this panel? So usually when we are having panels on representation and inclusion, it's gender that pops out, and often the panel will be heavy on women. But today we love to see men doing inclusion and diversity. Let's give them a round of applause. So I'm going to ask my first question, yes or no? Still believe in this democracy thing and the role of the media in bridging the gaps? Yes? No? Maybe? Are their mics on? She can't.
Maybe you should try this one.
It's working.
Yes. So yes or no? This democracy thing, this media and its role, do you think there's a space for it?
Yes.
Mr. Pele?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, why? Why? Why must we do media and democracy?
I think after theocracy, which is rulership by God Almighty, the next is democracy. Although there are some institutions and countries that has made democracy look like democracy.
Right, thank you. Next, yes. Joel, that's you. Can we have the other mic, please, so we don't...
Okay. So I think it's the only form of government where human rights are respected, are supposed to be respected when you take into context some democracies that have been practiced in sustainable, prioritized, and protected and promoted.
Right, thank you very much. And you, sir?
Yeah, I would say that it is fundamental. Democracy is premised on people's choices. So without the media, actually, I don't think there's a democracy.
So the media is to provide information.
Exactly.
Right. Thank you very much. And we would be assessing how the media is doing that. But jumping straight into your own personal communities and the work that you do with your direct beneficiaries, I'd like for you to, in 2 minutes, tell us why you do what you do and how the media can support you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Such an honor to be here. One of those people, you know how in the U.S., anytime we see a uniformed person, we'll say thank you for your service. I definitely think that journalists are one of those people that every time we see, we should say thank you for
a round of applause.
So I run an organization that is inspired because we just don't have enough women in positions of leadership. Now, You want to know what role the media plays in that? Actually, the media contributed in shaping how people perceive women as leaders. Unfortunately, based on how we were all raised, regardless of where you come from across West Africa, we have perceptions based on our socialization process on the role of a woman, right? And leadership just happens to be one of those things where women are not good enough for. Hopefully that's not the case in the media space, but we know it's the reality. So what we've seen, unfortunately, and sorry, I have to say this here, in case the person who wrote that story is here, and I have stories for days. In the last election, there was a front page, woman of 5 runs for president. Have you ever seen a newspaper that published man of 10 and wives with 4 wives runs for president? That is the power of the media and what it can do to either position us to have an inclusive society or do the reverse. And unfortunately, pushing for legislation, and we know that gender quotas work, and hopefully we will get there. But until we shape you women, we will not get women into leadership. So, and she cannot be a leader. Those are the conversations that we were trying to have, and those are the gaps that we were trying to bridge. And as I said, unless we bridge that perception gap as to how we view women as leaders, so we don't ask them, who's going to take care of your home? We saw these things in the media, by the way, like on Twitter and all these platforms. Who's going to take care of your home? If you failed in a marriage, then you cannot be a leader. But we don't hold men against this same set of standards. So that's how we do this, and that's why this work is important and the role the media plays.
I mean, saying current rates, we will not do parity in another 140 or so years. So shouldn't we just give up and just go with the flow? Another 100 years, we won't achieve parity. What is the critical intervention that is really needed? No, I wanted you to follow up on that, but maybe you can just hold your thoughts on that so that I can pick the thoughts on. Yes, Mr. Epele, I mean, you've been advocating for the rights of marginalized groups, and in the past, I've heard a lot of groups of people who do advocacy for disability say that the focus is mostly on women representation. Do you feel the same way, that the voices, the stories, and even the images of persons with disability are often not adequately, correctly, sufficiently represented and presented by the media?
Wow. That's a barrel of questions. Well, my name is Jake Epele. I'm a proud person with albinism and a proud member of the disability community. Let me start by answering that question with a personal story. And that reveals the power of the media. I am from a very poor home. The poorest of the poorest, and struggled with my education. Couldn't cope with the regular school education, so I dropped out and decided to school myself. So I'm self-educated, and coming from a very unknown, remote family background, there's no way I would be the person that I am today without the power of the media. I learned to put my story in proper perspective and put the focus on what the society can do, not necessarily what the society has done. I learned not to be confrontational, but engaging. And today I can say humbly speaking, that I have a reasonable visibility thanks to the media, thanks to organizations like Premium Time, to friends like Dakbo, and some of the individuals that are on this platform and those in the audience today. I say that to say what the media can do for the most vulnerable. And the fact that even at the milestones that we have achieved collectively as media practitioners, by the way, my background is media. As media practitioners, a lot more still have to be done. While we are pushing for inclusion of everyone, there's a need to also push for a truly inclusive media. A media space that recognizes those that have been left behind. Many times, oftentimes, when I'm invited to analyze issues around disability, I always tell the media house, don't box me to a corner. Don't just ask me to explain what is happening in the community of persons with disability. I want to be part of the general conversation. Because within the disability communities are women, are young people, are children. And so for us to win this battle, we must pursue inclusive editorial, inclusive news item. We must look at people that you think are not newsworthy and make them newsworthy. We must recognize the fact that persons with disability can function and become an editor. We must recognize the fact that I'm seated here and I can see your faces, the way and manner I will recognize you, because many times I've passed my friend Dakbo and I didn't know he was the one, until he talks. And so in spite of that, I still have the capacity to present news. I still have the capacity to analyze the fuel subsidy and postulate solutions. I still have the capacity to become the best broadcaster in Nigeria, in the world. I still have the capacity to do what is unthinkable in the most moral sense. And so, as I end, I would like to ask all of you to please lend a hand, not out of sympathy, but out of empathy, to every person with disability, in spite of their disability. That's why I started by reminding you that yes, I have albinism, but I'm proud to be a person with albinism. Because without a person with albinism that I am, I wouldn't have been invited today to be part of this panel. Let me close by asking all of you to please look at me. Look at me. I want to remind you something. Can you remember the day you were born? Did you remember that you were the only one crying and everybody was rejoicing? You must live your life so well that the day you die, you will rejoice and everyone around you will cry. Thank you.
Amen. The power of narrative. Indeed, is a charge to us, the media, that we frame the narrative can empower or disempower. And that's why we are having this session, to highlight issues of representation, diversity. So as you can see, these are all various tell us how they feel about our work and how we can better represent their voices, their stories, and their images. So Noel, I'm coming to you also on the same matter of the work you do. I know that you work with inclusive development and you explore intersections of gender and rights of and rights of what? Disability, justice? Yes. So in what way have you interfaced with the media? And perhaps you can also share your experience on how you feel represented or not by the media.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I would also like to say a very big thank you to CGID for the amazing work they are doing at disability inclusion and at mainstreaming gender issues in a very peculiar way. Excuse me. So, our work is usually around issues of climate, gender, and disability justices. And we decide to focus on justices because we understand that other than just rights, people have rights, but it is only when they are able to enjoy their rights that is justice. So our focus is on disability justice as it intersects with climate justice and gender justice. Having said so, I would first of all commend the media for the amazing work that they did with supporting for the achievement for the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibitions Act. I think the media played a very integral role towards that. However, I have my own personal reservations as it concerns the media and how they portray persons with disabilities. And I've always said this. I strongly think that some of the stereotypes and myths and misconceptions that have driven violence and this is evidence in disabilities as afterthought. I would give you a very good example. Recently, Adamawa State elected a speaker who happens to be a person with disabilities, Mr. Bathiwa Wesley, and he happens to be a person with disabilities. I have had the irreversible displeasure of reading reportage about how motivational porn. Oh, if a person with disability can do this, why can't you? That's patronizing. That's one. Two, I've also read several reportages about how all kinds of discriminatory terminologies were used against him. And this again reinforces in my mind the fact that persons with disabilities would never be respected until they are seen to be doing something or to have achieved a feat. So we might disagree with this narrative, but then the evidences are there. That's on one regard. I would also talk about the work that we do around humanitarian response and recovery programs, particularly in coastal communities in Nigeria. What we have seen is oftentimes what happens is when journalists go to these communities to interact with these women who are statistically most impacted by fluvial flooding in those communities, they never interact with women with disabilities. They are never asked.
Do you think it's conscious or it's just?
I would say why it's conscious. Again, this might not be perceived across board as generally accepted, but I'm telling you from my own experiences. But then it's just how persons with disabilities are
found, or they are not at the space at which
hidden. They are not a hidden population. They are not ants.
I'm referring specifically to the communities.
In those communities. Yes. So I'll tell you something always. If you want to find them, you would find them. They're organized in groups, in communities, whether they're rural communities, peri-urban communities, whatever kind of communities that they are. What happens is it is as marketable, and that group of persons in any communities, you would find them. And this again brings to mind something I must really talk about with how journalists interact with persons with disabilities. There's something very important that's called community entry. So when you are going into a community, it's important that you find gatekeepers of those communities. And when you find them, you go through them, and through them you're able to meet different pressure groups in those communities. If you go through those right community entry techniques, you would always find persons in mainstream media. One last example, please. About 30 million persons with disabilities in Nigeria, right? Okay. And more than half of that population are women. Yet you would never find a commercial on TV, and I always say this, where a woman with disability is doing laundry, or giving a child a bath, or using cosmetics, or something like that. Are you therefore saying that women with disabilities don't do those things? Again, that is how the media has always portrayed persons with disabilities.
Right. Thank you for that expose from your experiences. So obviously, the media is being challenged to move away from the tunnel vision approach to dealing with issues of
across Nigeria. And it's just important to emphasize the power of the media in telling the stories of people who ordinarily will not be heard. I think every one of us can recall the picture that came out of Aleppo in 2016. The little boy that was pulled out of the wreck of a demolished building, due to bombing. And the picture of that boy looking confused with blood and dust and bewilderment in his face. That picture eloquently told the story of Syria without words. People who, for a lot of times, were desensitized about what was going on in Syria, the media brought the story of the little boy to their living room. It brought the story to their computers. It brought the story to their laptops. And somehow, all of us can interact with this little boy. We could see his face. We could see his fear. We could envision being him. We could think of our children being in that kind of situation. And somehow, it changed the narrative. We remember the story also of the washed up little boy who was trying to cross over Europe. And then he died. And he was washed up across the shore. You could look at him, you could see the hope, you could tell his story without knowing his story. And so, I think for the area where we work, a lot of people in conflict cannot tell their stories. They don't have the voice. They are busy trying to survive. They are busy trying to live, to bother about sharing to the world what they are going through. It is the power of the media, the power of storytelling, that allows me and you to sit in the comfort of our AC cars and our AC rooms to interact with those realities that otherwise we will never hear, otherwise we may never know. And so it is fundamentally important that the media appreciates its role. The essence of media is not the story of the powerful. The essence of the media is the story of those who ordinarily cannot tell their stories. The platform you are able to give to people who don't have any, and your ability to make an issue of what is important but ordinarily doesn't show in the scale of things. And so in our work, the media is the life wire. The media is the conduit from which we are able to relate to the world the realities of conflict and somehow able to compel the world to act. In reality, conflicts are often sensationalized. The more you could paint a picture of horror and all of those things, the more clicks you get. But conflicts often talk about the power of resilience, the power of agency of communities who are able in the worst of circumstances to cater for themselves, to protect themselves, to be able to move on. And oftentimes, the resilience, the courage, and the agency of communities in conflict is not the center of reportage. Because it's not sexy. It is not sexy to talk about the fact that women could brace the bombs to take their children to school or to make sure their children are learning even when there is war. But of course, if there are scattered bodies on the streets, it gets you the click. So the inability of the media to focus on what is often neglected positives, stories of courage, resilience, and community, and humanity in times of conflict, diminishes the agency of those communities and gives an unbalanced narrative of what conflict is. The other thing I would like to mention is just what happened recently. The story of the 5 billionaires who wanted to go see the Titanic, and the story of hundreds of immigrants whose boats capsized about the same time in the same Western Hemisphere, and the fact that the story of 200 plus humans who were drowning did not receive 5% attention like the ones of the billionaires. The fact that these people were drowning, that we couldn't even find boats to go and rescue them, and the fact that the military and the Air Force and everybody was sending boats to the Atlantic, tells you again that oftentimes, inadvertently, we put different values to life. Yeah. And that's what happens in conflicts.
But is it inadvertent?
Well, I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'm trying to be nice. But in a lot of situations, and without diminishing the importance of anybody's life, when conflicts happen in the West, it's a different kind of reportage than when it happens in the global South. And it is unfortunate that we live in a world where the value of life is also premised on the color of your skin. And that happens again and again and again. So my point then is, we will not judge journalists or the media. We cannot praise you for what you say about the powerful. We can only praise you for what you say about those who can't say thank you to you, and what you do for those who can't do anything for themselves. And as long as the world continue to diminish the value of the life of the boy in Aleppo, the life of those in Sudan as we speak, the life of those in Ethiopia, the life of our brothers and sisters in Cameroon who have been fighting for years, we don't see that in the news. But if something else happens in the West, it is all over the place. As long as we continue to have this imbalance in the value we put to life and the quality of reportage of conflicts, we are only maintaining that myth that perhaps because of the accident of your birth, you are worth less than the others. And that is not journalism. Thank you.
That is not journalism, says Jude. Welcome. Thank you for coming and joining us as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Grace Jerry. She's the Executive Director, Inclusive Friends. What do you do, basically, at Inclusive Friends?
All right, thank you very much, and thank you to CGID for this opportunity. Inclusive Friends is an organization where we rely heavily on data and research to promote disability inclusion in the area of democracy and governance, promoting humanitarian peace and conflict action, also promoting gender participation. And of course, we look at the areas of inclusive education and economic empowerment for women and girls with disabilities, working across all the states.
And what do you find are the key critical issues of representation and inclusion with members of your community?
All right, I would begin by saying that one of the things that the community of persons with disabilities look forward to the most is how accurately our issues are depicted, how accurately our issues are captured, how accurately our issues are reported. If you listen to the conversation of my colleagues here, you would know that the community of persons with disabilities that I represent is, here in Nigeria alone, is about close to 35 million people. That is almost the population of a country. And if a person with disabilities in Nigeria alone would say we would separate ourselves from every other person, we are enough to set up and run and govern a country. So that is a population that should not be ignored, that in whatever intervention, in whatever programs, their interest needs to be carried along, their interest needs to be considered. I'm saying this to say that when we look at how issues of disabilities are being reported, you would know that there's still a lot of gaps in terms of knowledge and capacity within the media space. because issues of disabilities are still projected from the angle of charity and not human rights. And we have long since moved from that point of charity to human rights. First, as a human being with inherent rights, born as a human. As such, I have every right, equal right as another citizen of my dear country. If the media would view me first from that angle of first being a human with an inherent right, then you would want to report my issues from the point of projecting me as that human with right. So it is important that first and foremost, you fashion yourself with the knowledge. Recently, we got a contract, I would say, to review a research that an organization did. And it gladdened my heart because they did a research on the community of persons with disabilities, but they say before we publish this research to the space, we need the lens of persons with disabilities to review in terms of language, in terms of how the issues are depicted, in terms of how they capture issues of disability. And it was, it gladdened our heart so much because we sat over this research and we did a lot of terminology changes. We did a lot of, a couple of even citing some policies, some laws, some articles that speak specifically to those issues. And now I would say to you that as soon as that report is released, you will know that it captures issues of disability as it should. And this I'm going to make as a recommendation to the media people sitting in this room. Yes, we understand that there is capacity gap, and that is why we are here to work very, very closely with you. At the Inclusive Friends, one of the things that we have done is to provide training for media, both nationally and even outside the country, and even statewide. We have provided trainings over time. We would be glad to provide you with these trainings. We will be glad to sit with you. We'll be glad to read your articles. Just read them and provide the right language and right terminologies. Because it's important that what you put out in the space, first and foremost, is universally agreed, is universally accepted with the language of the UNCRPD. Every one of you seated in this room, either you come from a country that has ratified the UNCRPD, and because you have ratified or you are a signatory to it, it means you are bound by the right language and the right way to promote disability issues. So you don't do otherwise. Don't do otherwise. I'm about to speak a PG language, but I won't do that. Don't do otherwise. And that is why we are here to work very closely.
Can you give us examples of languages that some of these languages, because even there are terminologies that have changed to terminologies that are more empowering, that are more representative, that speak. So give us some examples of new terminologies that are correct, politically correct.
Exactly. All right, I think one of the most popularly used, I would say, is the community of the special need, the special need community. Okay, let me not say what I'm about to say again. But it's
a safe space, not so.
All right. How many of you here, one way or the other, you're having one form of financial challenge or the other? Financial challenge. You don't have enough fuel in your car. Are you a special needs person? You're a special needs person, I would say, because you need money to buy fuel. And that need for me is special. That need for you is special, isn't it? So you don't use that language to classify the community of people with disabilities. It's as simple as persons with disabilities or people with disabilities and not people living with disability. I can live with my cat. I can live with my dear sister, but I'm not living with a disability, all right? So these are people with disabilities and not special needs. And they would go as far as challenging you. No, we don't believe in disability. We don't believe in disabled. You people are special. That is ableism. We don't promote that. You are trying to patronize us and make us feel like we're special. No, we don't need that. All we need you to do is to look at us from that point of first a human, first a person with an impairment, first a person with a disability. So you report from that angle, a person with disability, not a person with special need. Thank you.
Wow.
Disability reporting 101. Thank you, Grace. Beautifully done. So we're going to quickly do this next round, and then I'll open the floor for contribution and maybe some responses from the media representatives who are listening to us. So I'm going to come start with you. Back now, we want solutions, okay? So back home in Ghana, my organization, Alliance for Women in Media, we conducted a baseline survey on the status of women in Ghanaian media. And one of the findings across the country, it was a national survey. Professor Audrey Gajepo led that research for us. Only 1% of females in media were in any top management positions. And this is within the media industry itself. So whilst you're crying that we're not representing your communities enough, I'll tell you that within the media space itself, these issues of representation and inclusion and diversity are issues we are dealing with. So in terms of solutions, how do we bridge this gap, really? Let's focus on solutions. And if you can speak from the standpoint of your primary community that you work for and with.
Absolutely. So I'm glad that you have data. I think one of the first steps will be collecting the data. I think that's really critical so that we know the reality. But in case I don't have an opportunity to talk about this again, I listened to the keynote yesterday, even though I wasn't here, and Richard mentioned something about we need new voices and we need new players. Now, beyond the source of your news as the media, I think one of the things that we need to talk about, and I think continues to be the elephant in the room, is ownership of media, right? Because when I listen to everything that we have said around representation, if the people who own the media are a handful of old men, with all due respect, then there is not much that's going to change in a very long time. And I think we should confront that, right? So ownership is a big piece. The more we have women as owners of these media houses, the more likely you would have women in leadership of these media houses. And this is just evidence-based, right? Because we will represent our kind. It is easier to represent our kind. Then we talk about distribution as well, right? So we leave ownership, we go to distribution of media. It's the same thing, right? We will distribute to our peeps. It's just the way this thing works, right? And so I'm talking that beyond whose voice you're giving access to and you're portraying in the media, I think one of the things that can really start to solve it is ownership. And then how do we solve ownership? I think this is where financing comes in. And this is a conversation that we do not have. But women would need access to finance. There is a reason why Mo Abudu is a shining light. And there's the one, right? She shouldn't be the only one. So we need access to finance and access to capital for women to be able to own media. And I think that that's a big conversation. If we can do that, we can start to crack it. And then I think the other thing is, I really loved what Grace said about representation. Look, this thing has to be intentional. That's one of the things we've learned. If we're not intentional about it, it will not happen. So that intentionality about looking around and saying who's at the table and who's not at the table. So I think if we can just talk about ownership and then look at the value chain of the media and see how we can be more representative. And then I think the second thing is being intentional, whether it's at the organizational level, the institutional level. And I mean, a few years ago, BBC did 50-50. I don't know if we know about that campaign, but the intentionality about we need women's voices, we need women to be in front of the camera, behind the camera, directing, producing. It was intentional. And to you, I'm not sure who mentioned it, but oh yeah, it was Noel. Nigeria has 50% women. That's why I was snapping at that point. So when people say we cannot find women, it's a little ridiculous, right? Because we are half of the population. So that's one. The second thing I will say is we have to go beyond being gender responsive within our organizations, especially with the media, to being gender transformative. And I'll tell you what that looks like. We know that going to the field as a journalist can be dangerous, right? what are the intentional steps for a woman versus a man to go to the field? Instead of saying, no, this place is too dangerous to send a woman, what about putting in place the right sets of policies, insurance, whatever it is that is needed for a woman to be able to function in that role? What are the support systems? I mean, Busana and I had an exchange this morning because I was supposed to come yesterday, but I couldn't because my nanny went away. And so my 3 kids, I can't leave them at home and fly here. These are real issues. Yeah. And I know that you might not be able to relate to it, but we have to be intentional about creating support systems for the media as a whole to become inclusive.
It's brilliant what you've just said. I mean, yesterday we were reminded about the power of the mindset and attitude and the way we view problems. When COVID came in Ghana, we also had this canker of most expert voices and images being men, okay? So COVID came and all of a sudden it was possible to interview people from the comfort of their homes via Zoom. And it was one of the reasons, because the time, morning show, evening show, women are doing school runs, so they can't make it for a 20, 30-minute program at 6 a.m. for a TV or a radio program. But yet, we were not yet open to the opportunity of speaking to women at the comfort of where they are at any point in time. COVID came, and all of a sudden, everybody was doing Zoom from their homes. And we saw a spike in women voices because it was more convenient for them to engage that way. So thank you for that. So we really need to be more intentional about it. Mr. Jake, also on solutions, basically, and as we agree that the media itself needs representation in diversity, I always ask my colleagues, so how many media houses can say, okay, we have persons, what was the word again? Persons with disability on our staff list. And we know that diversity is very good for business. Even with something as simple as pronunciation of names, if you had ethnic diversity in your media organizations, you won't come on air and mispronounce names of people in the country that you work with. So there is value to that. So will your advocacy also include asking media people to do staff audits to see how diverse their organizations are? Because we hope that if you're diverse, then we'll represent the diversity that our communities are made up of. Mr. Jake.
All right, thank you. Oftentimes when I have opportunities like this, I'm carried away by my passion to get the job done, and I talk less about what we do. But if you are looking to hear about what we do, by the way, my organization had a name change from the Albino Foundation to TAF Africa. TAF actually now represents the All Right Foundation because we sort of scaled up the work we do. We started as an albinism focus group, and well, from the feedback, we did reasonably well. Sometimes it's good to blow your trumpet, you know. And, you know, certain and a number of organizations put a demand on us to expand our services and serve the wider community of persons with disability. I think one of the success of what we have done has centered on disability inclusion and not necessarily an exclusive list of maybe intervening in governance. So we're in health sector, in education, in human rights, and issues around women. I'm very passionate about women. I'm very, very passionate about women. And I believe that you are the best managers of resources. And when you give a woman a chance to do anything, oftentimes she does it better. And I have lived by example. My management is made up of 7 women and 6 men. And my board is diverse. We're made up of 4 women, 4 very skillful women and 5 men. So diversity is important to me. Having said that, let me take a detour. Let me flip the conversation. I know that, yes, the media is not doing well for us. I want to also zero in, as I conclude, on what our community can do to get media attention, you know. And so I told you my background, coming from a very poor home, no name, nothing to write home about. And to me, that was an advantage. And so I needed to create what will attract the media in the most honest way. The media are scouting for news. And so if you create a story that is newsworthy and credible, they will come to you, you know. So we need to create our own story, verifiable story, credible story, okay? Secondly, we need to mainstream these stories into the media, okay? Take, for instance, we're dealing with the issue of fuel subsidies and all that. And I told my colleagues in the office, listen, I need you guys to put out a simple question out there. Who are the Nigerians that are suffering? What are they feeling? What can we do to make their life better? And just launching that research, and I'm going to name names. Channel has called us, they're interested in that story. Arise has called us, they're interested in that outcome. TVC has called us, you know. And so we need to, as persons with disability, and some of them are stars in their right, we need to be able to create an honest story, and by way of relationship, because you see, listen to this, relationship determines allocation of resources. So by way of relationship, you know, you can actually mainstream your story. So if I want to talk to Arise, I talk to Nduka, one phone call away, put Jack on, and that's it. I want to talk to Channel, I talk to John. You see, I'm a Christian. When God wanted to deliver Egypt, he didn't ask Moses to go to Deputy Pharaoh. Right. He told Moses to go to Pharaoh.
Right.
So in the act of negotiation, you speak to the person in authority and get a yes or no. So we need to learn to mainstream our story in the mainstream media. We've created a strategy that would regularly keep us on the tube.
Right.
Every week. For the next 6 months. I can tell you, yesterday I was on 2 major networks. Today I have another interview. So we need to learn to tell our story in the most honorable way. And finally, we need to create a strategy that sustains that story. So you say, okay, we've talked everything about albinism. Oh, wait a minute. Have you talked about a mother of a person with albinism? What about a friend of persons with albinism? I remember, and I end with this, I remember growing up, and I wanted to go out with my cousins, you know, and they said to me they don't want to go out. So I assumed that they didn't want to go out. These are my cousins.
Right.
So I decided to go out on my own. And as I was going, and I turned my back, and I saw them coming. So I went back to them, and I said, but you told me, I said, I beg, we don't want to go out with you. Now,
why?
Ladies and gentlemen, this story happened 55 years ago. I'm 62. I still remember it.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so very much for sharing some success story and new strategies, charging marginalized and underrepresented communities to be more also proactive in their media strategy, so that the media cannot, you know, avoid you. They can't avoid you at all. So I'm going to take just about 3 questions from the 3 columns in the room. 1, 1, 1, and then we'll come back. Jake and Noel, you wrap up, and Grace with us. So yes, 1 gentleman here, so 1 lady here, and then 1 gentleman there. Yes? Yes. You with the earpod. Yes. Your name and straight to the point, okay? Speed it up.
My name is Lasisi Godwin. I'm a public health researcher and an academic writer. Now, I'm giving this introduction based on the question I'm about to ask. My dear mommy on the right-hand side.
Grace.
Yes, okay. Mommy Grace, yes. She spoke about the contextual definition of classifying people with disabilities. Now, in 400 level, I conducted a research in University of Ilorin on people with disabilities. And now in research projects, there's something we call operational definition of terms. We define words based on the context of the research we're carrying out. Now, from my own understanding, when we say special needs, I do not see the special needs as the person. I see it in the form of the needs that they require or the needs that they actually need. Now, for example, now when we're conducting the research, we're giving out questionnaires to the people with disabilities. Now, for the blind, we use Braille. For those with auditory impairments, we use different measures to get their opinions on the research we're carrying out. Now, what I want to understand is this. If we are talking about classification of people with special needs, and according to what you said people with disabilities should not be referred to those as should not be referred to people that need special needs. Now, I want to ask, what do we now refer to as what they actually need? For example, now someone with auditory impairments to enhance inclusive education in a class, he will definitely need hearing and auditory aid to help him hear. For those with partial blindness, they might need to sit in the front or need ocular glasses.
I think she gets the question.
Yes, so it can be.
And for inclusive, and what she's saying is equally as valuable as what this man is saying. You need to listen.
He's already taken the mic.
Good morning. My name is Tahir. I'm a local journalist from Jigawa State. My div in my area, he's quite brilliant, and he pursued his first degree. So we made a little my intervention to have a scholarship for MSc. He's the first person that right now 1,000 from 2.5 million men. Inspiration story of those people with disability. We have to inspire them, making some interview with them, and help them to make their dream. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. Okay, one bonus to the lady. So we have two.
Thank you very much. My name is Osawana May Bizugbe. I am a journalist and I work with the CGID. So my question, thank you to the panelists for dissecting this very important topic. We've already identified the issues, we've identified the gaps, and it seems like we all know the gaps, we all know the issues. But the question is, it seems we come here year in, year out, we hold all of these conferences, these gatherings, and we have these conversations, we talk about the same issues here and there. And then at the end of the day, it seems like we're not saying tangible solutions. How do we rally stakeholders' advocacy and policy making to ensure that the media deploy best practices to ensure democratic accountability in terms of the issues of inclusion and representation? How do we ensure that we put strategies in place that would begin to yield tangible results? Because it seems like
who are the change agents?
The media, we are part of the change.
So how do you do that?
And I agree personally as a journalist that just as Noel identified that we